phones, Babylons can't crack the
What it do, YouTube? B Kelly back again with another banger. Today's video, I'm gonna be making my MAC Conference College Football predictions for the 2020-21 season. And first, I'm gonna be talking about the East Division. With my first place spot in the East Division, I have Buffalo. Now, even though Buffalo struggled a little bit in conference play last year, they're still a pretty dang good football team, and they have a very underrated running back. But now, I say they're going to finish 9-3 on the season this year. I have them losing at K-State in the first game, then bouncing back and beating St. Francis in the next game, then losing to Ohio State, then going on a winning streak beating Bowling Green, Akron, Ball State, Kent State, then losing at Army, then beating Northern Illinois, Miami, Ohio, and Western Michigan to win out on the season. But best case scenario in my eyes for them is 9-3. I don't see them being 10-2, so I'm going to stick with 9-3. Worst case scenario in my eyes would have to be a 6-6 season. Now, I don't think they're going to be 6-6. If they're going to be the worst case scenario, I'm going to say 7-5. But some teams that I could see them losing to that I have them beating is Kent State, Miami, Ohio, and Western Michigan. Those are games to watch out for. Definitely not an easy schedule for Buffalo, but they can get to 9-3. But I wouldn't be surprised if they were anywhere from 7-5 to 8-4. With my second place spot, I have Miami, Ohio. Now, Miami, Ohio actually took the first place spot in the East Division last year, and they could definitely do it again this year. I'm predicting an 8-4 record for them this year. I have them losing at Pitt, then beating University of Arkansas Pine Bluff, then losing to Cincinnati, but then beating Akron, but then losing to Army, then going on a winning streak beating Bowling Green, Ohio, Central Michigan, Ball State, but then finally losing to Buffalo, but then winning their final 2 games of the season beating Kent State and Eastern Michigan. Now let's talk about the best case scenario in my eyes. Best case scenario in my eyes is a 9-3 season if they can beat Buffalo. Now, worst case scenario in my eyes is kind of similar to Buffalo because it's definitely not easy, and I would have to say, honestly, a 6-6 season because Ohio, Central Michigan, Kent State, those are going to be some pretty tough games, and even Eastern Michigan, even though they lost their starting quarterback, that could be a trap game as well. Well, that's my prediction on them. I think 9-3 is pretty possible for them as a best case scenario, but I'm going to stick with 8-4 in my prediction right now. With my third place spot in the East Division, I have Kent State. Now, Kent State I'm kind of impressed with because of Dustin Crum. I think he's severely underrated. But this season, I have them being 7-5, and it's mainly because of out-of-conference play. Let's talk about the out-of-conference schedule real quick. They go to Penn State, and they're versus Kennesaw State, and then they go to Kentucky and Alabama. I have them going 1-3 in those first 4 games, and I only have them beating Kennesaw State, and I really don't have them competing with Penn State, Kentucky, or Alabama. Now let's get to conference play. Conference play, I have them beating Northern Illinois and Akron, but then losing to Buffalo, then beating Western Michigan, then beating Bowling Green, Ohio, then losing at Miami, and then beating Central Michigan in their final game of the season to only have 2 conference losses, which is pretty good, but unfortunately, they're going to be 7-5 because of that hard out-of-conference schedule. Now, let's talk about the best case scenario in my eyes. Best case scenario in my eyes would have to be a 9-3 season if they could be undefeated in conference play and beat Buffalo and Miami. Worst case scenario would probably have to be a 4-8 season because Western Michigan, Miami, Central Michigan, and Ohio and Buffalo are all going to be very tough games, and they're going to be very good games in my eyes, and that's why they could go 5-7 if they lost all those games. With my fourth place spot, I have Ohio. Now, I'm predicting a 6-6 record for the Bobcats this season. I have them beating NC Central, losing to Boston College and Marshall, then beating Texas State, and then I have them beating Toledo and Eastern Michigan. But then I have them losing to Miami, then I have them beating Bowling Green, then I have them going on a losing streak, losing to Central Michigan, Kent State, and Buffalo. Then winning their final game of the season at home versus Akron. But let's talk about the best case and worst case scenario real quick. Best case scenario in my eyes for the Ohio Bobcats, I would say is 8-4. I don't see them being better than 8-4. They could beat Central Michigan, maybe even like Marshall and Boston College possibly, but I would say they're not going to do anything better than 8-4. I'd say 8-4 is their ceiling, and I would say the worst case scenario on this schedule for them, I would have to say is 6-6. I do see them going to a bowl game, And I would say 6-6 or 5-7 would be the worst. 5-7 would have to be the worst case scenario if they lost to Toledo, because Toledo is a talented team. The only team last year that had 6 wins that didn't go to a bowl game. But that's on another subject. With my 5th place spot in the East Division, I have Bowling Green. Now for Bowling Green this season, I'm predicting a 2-10 record. I have them losing to Ohio State, beating Robert Morris. Then I have them losing to Illinois, Buffalo, Liberty, Miami, Toledo, Ohio, Kent State. Then I have them finally beating Akron. Then I have them losing to Eastern Michigan and Northern Illinois. Now, best case scenario in my eyes would be a 4-8 season if they could beat Northern Illinois or Eastern Michigan. Worst case scenario would have to be 1-11 if they couldn't beat Akron, but I can see them beating Akron. Akron didn't win a game last season, and Bowling Green did. With my last place spot in the East Division, I have Akron. Now, I'm predicting a 2-10 record for the Zips this year. I have them losing to Youngstown State in their first game, beating New Mexico State, losing to Clemson, Miami, Buffalo, Kent State, then finally beating UMass at home, then losing to Ball State, Toledo, Bowling Green, Western Michigan, and at Ohio. Now, best case scenario in my eyes for them would be 3-9 if they could beat Youngstown State, but honestly, saying 2-10 is being very polite to this team that didn't win a game last season. Worst case scenario, which likely could happen again, is 0-12. Now it is time for the West Division of the MAC Conference. With my first place spot in the West Division, I have Central Michigan, and I'm predicting an 8-4 record for this season. I have them losing to San Jose State, losing to at Nebraska and at Northwestern, then beating Bryant University, then beating Eastern Michigan, NIU, Western Michigan in conference play, but then losing to Miami, Ohio, then beating Ohio, Toledo, Ball State in the final conference game of the season at Kent State. I have them losing. Now, best case scenario in my eyes is a 9-3 season. If they can beat Kent State in the final game, I do think they can beat Kent State. They could even probably beat Miami, Ohio, but I only see them being 9-3 at best. Now, let's talk about the worst case scenario in my eyes. Worst case scenario in my eyes for Central Michigan. Central Michigan's been a pretty dominant team, and they've been pretty dang consistent. I would say worst case scenario for them would have to be 7-5. With my second place spot, I have Western Michigan, and for this season, I'm predicting a 6-6 record. Now, pay attention now, because they have a pretty tough out-of-conference schedule as well. As we said earlier, just like Kent State, except not as hard. Now, let's talk about that real quick. I'm predicting a 6-6 record. I have them beating Stony Brook, then losing their next 3 games at Cincinnati, at Notre Dame, and versus Syracuse. And then now let's go into conference play. I have them beating Ball State, Toledo, then losing to Central Michigan and Kent State. Then I have them beating Eastern Michigan and Northern Illinois and Akron in those 3 straight games. Final game of the season, I have them losing to Buffalo. Now, let's talk about the worst case scenario for them this season. Worst case scenario, in my eyes, would have to be a 4-8 season if they lost to Toledo or Eastern Michigan, or maybe even Northern Illinois at that point. But best case scenario, in my eyes, would have to be a 8-4 season, even though I really do not see them accomplishing it, because I feel like beating either Buffalo, Kent State, or Central Michigan is going to be very, very, very tough. With my third place spot in the West Division of the MAC Conference, I have Eastern Michigan. Now, I'm predicting a 4-8 record, and before you guys try to call me out on the Toledo thing in the next part, I will tell you this. I have Eastern Michigan ahead of them. They have the same amount of wins in conference play, but Eastern Michigan beats them in head-to-head play. But let's get to the schedule. I had them losing at Kentucky in their first game, then beating Coastal Carolina and Northern Illinois, then losing to Missouri, Central Michigan, Ohio, Army, but then beating Toledo, then losing to Western Michigan and Ball State, then beating Bowling Green, and then losing at Miami, Ohio. Best case scenario in my eyes is a 6-6 season. Worst case scenario in my eyes is a 3-9 season. With my fourth place spot, I have Toledo. Now, Toledo, I have them beating Tulsa, then losing to San Diego State and Michigan State in back-to-back games, then beating CCSU, then losing to Ohio, Western Michigan, and then beating Bowling Green to end the losing streak, Then I have them losing to Eastern Michigan, but then I have them beating Akron, and then I have them losing to Central Michigan and Northern Illinois. In the final game of the season, I have them beating Ball State. Best case scenario in my eyes is a 7-5 season if they can beat Northern Illinois, Eastern Michigan, and Western Michigan. But worst case scenario in my eyes is my record right now, which is 5-7, because this is a team that could easily go to a bowl game. I wouldn't be surprised if they go 6-6 or 7-5. With my 5th place spot, I have Ball State. Now I'm predicting a 4-8 record for Ball State. I have them beating Maine, then losing to Michigan, Indiana, Wyoming, Western Michigan, Buffalo, then beating Northern Illinois and Akron in back-to-back games. Then I have them losing to Miami, Eastern Michigan, and Toledo to finish off the season to be 4-8. Now let's talk about the best case, worst case scenario. Best case scenario in my eyes for them would probably have to be a 5-7 season, but I don't see them being anything better than 4-8 and 5-7. Worst case scenario, though, let's talk about that a little bit. Worst case scenario in my eyes is a 3-9 season if they cannot beat Northern Illinois. With my last place spot in the West Division of the MAC Conference, I have Northern Illinois. Oh, how the mighty have fallen from the New Year's 6 bowls they used to go to, surprisingly. Now, I'm predicting a 3-9 record for them this season. I have them beating Rhode Island, but then going on a big losing streak, losing to Maryland, Eastern Michigan, Iowa, Kent State, Central Michigan, Ball State, BYU, Buffalo, Western Michigan. But in the final 2 games of the season, I have them beating Toledo at home and beating Bowling Green in Bowling Green. But let's talk about the best case, worst case scenario. Best case scenario in my eyes for them would have to be a 5-7 record if they could beat Eastern Michigan or Ball State. Worst case scenario in my eyes would have to be a 2-10 record if they could not beat Toledo. If you guys liked the video, remember to smash that like button, turn on the post notifications, and subscribe for more videos. B. Kelly out.